Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, we hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's wait for the others. We still have 5 minutes.
Well, everyone's here early today.
That's good for once.
Oh,
Yo, what's up, Aaron?
hello, Yongchuan. How's life?
Very good. I guess I'm sitting at home, enjoying snacks while sitting in lesson after lesson.
Okay, sounds good.
So I see that some of you are at the university, right?
Yeah, me. I'm staying in hostel.
Oh, I see. So basically those who can go back home are home, and those who stay in the hostel are at the university.
Yeah, correct.
I see. But you're not gathered in one classroom, right?
Yeah, of course. Yes, we cannot.
Okay. Well, makes sense.
Mm.
I mean, I hear from my other friend that school is quite crowded as well.
Yeah,
So,
because all the freshmen is coming in.
Yeah, I know. This year we have more freshmen than usual.
Serious?
Yeah,
serious?
yeah. It seems because many people couldn't go overseas for university. That's what I've heard. So we have more students.
Oh.
How does that work? Because I hear that SCTD is quite popular also. And
Also, of course, we're the best. So they're starting to realize that.
Okay, okay.
In the next few years, we're going to have something like 10,000 students per year.
Then we need a bigger campus.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll dislodge NUS and we'll take the campus of NUS. There might be some fighting involved, so be ready to be called to arms.
by then we will be alumni.
All the better, right? You're going to be the elite forces.
Will you be teaching the fresh course this year?
Well, again,
Will you be teaching the fresh course this year?
yeah, two sessions. All right, let's see how many are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, no, 12. Wait, I don't know how many of you are there.
I think some haven't come on yet.
Yeah. There is no way here on Zoom to see how many. No, wait. There is 14 participants. So 13 of you are there. Given the fact that you are 30, everybody's going to be there once we're 31. So more than half of you are missing.
Given how the timetables in SUTD are arranged, that might be expected.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see no breaks at all.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, it's quite insane.
I looked at my Thursday timetable. It says 3 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Ah, nice.
0 breaks.
And then what do? They bring you directly to the hospital for reanimation?
I have no clue, but I believe they'll be conducting lots of analysis because the first lesson is analytics H. So you conduct an analysis, and then after that, they simulate your death in simulations and modeling.
Yeah.
And they end off with an introduction to algorithms. What do you do after you die?
Probably. They're going to test your brain to see whether there is anything going on still.
Or they'll call you strong AI or something and say that you become sentient and conscious.
Conscious. Sure.
So I can,
sorry.
I can share documents also through Zoom, right?
I think so. Through chat.
Okay, I'll send now a document that might be helpful. Well, it's going to be helpful for sure. Oh, wait, I have to look for it. This is one. Okay. Now I'm going to send it. So this. Oh. Okay, I'll explain you later what these two documents are. Let's wait for 5 more. No, 5 more of you should arrive. Yeah. Then I'll explain to you what these documents are. So each of you is alone in a room, right?
Yeah, you
Not
can.
really. Not really. We have a double room in hostel.
Oh, I see.
So, stupid, but okay. Anyway.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Damien, welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, so first thing we need to download these 2 documents here in the Zoom group chat.
Hello, Zhibo.
Hey, so
Hey, nice to meet
what? Yes.
you.
Yeah. I don't see the documents in the
Question being together.
It's in the chat box. I mean, if you see, I don't know you guys, but I find Zoom more complicated to use than Skype.
I think yes, Zoom is slightly more difficult than Skype. Skype is more intuitive.
Yeah, I don't understand why such a mania about the Zoom thing. I mean, what is it that it has more than Skype?
It can share specific screens. So if you only want to show one thing, you can make sure they only see that and not the other things you have open on your computer.
I see.
You have more control over the privacy settings in Zoom. You can unmute people and other stuff, which I don't know how they do that, but apparently the host has that authority.
I see.
Yeah, so it's you can sort of dictate how the meeting will go.
I think the big one is breakout rooms. So you can subdivide the entire chat into different sets of participants for their own individual discussions and then bring them back together.
I see. I see. Well, these are all things that I will never learn how to use, so completely irrelevant to me.
Some class.
Let's see how many. One more, and then we start. Well, in fact, two more. And
Is
then
it? So the documents you send through Zoom, is it the same you upload in Dimension?
no,
Different.
no. These are two
Okay.
different documents. I will explain to you in a second.
Sure.
Just, I want to wait 2 more minutes for the other two persons to arrive.
Sure.
If they don't arrive in 2 minutes, I will start.
Okay.
Sure, no problem.
In the meanwhile, given the fact that I many times in the past I referred to my dogs, I can show you. Here is my dog. This is the superintendent.
Finally,
Finally.
Yes.
the best examples during class.
Yeah.
Does he solve mysteries? He looks like he solves mysteries.
What again?
Does he solve mysteries?
This one is very smart, very sharp. So it's very difficult to fool him. The other one is not the sharpest tool in the box, so to say. But this one is really sharp because he's blind, I think, and so you have to rely on learning words and figuring out in other ways that made him smarter, I think.
It's great.
I mean, you lose what you don't use, right?
Yeah. All right, so it doesn't seem that the other two are coming. Then I will start. Now, let's start from the clarification of the documents that I have uploaded and the ones that I just sent you. The document that I uploaded is the text that we're gonna read during the course of this semester. Some of you may ask me why we read just one text when the syllabus, in fact, has many texts. Well, the reason is simple. And is due to the fact that we are forced, due to the circumstances, to have class through Zoom. Now, having class through Zoom, as you have experienced maybe in the past, is not exactly conducive to didactics. And having to read difficult texts in the trying conditions of online learning is gonna make your task way more difficult than it is reasonable. So I've decided to read just one text. This will allow us to concentrate on the text more, and I hope by doing that, it will allow us to learn how I think one should read a text. Now, the way in which I think one should read a text, one could say, well, that's just what you think. Why should we follow the way that you follow? Well, on the one hand, because I'm your teacher, and so that's what you get. On the other, though, the way in which I read the text is not something that I come up with, is not something arbitrary. It's something that comes out of many years of experience. By the word experience, I mean many years of trials. So I tried different ways, and I think that this one that I'm proposing to you is the best one. Which one is this way of reading a text? Well, is the hermeneutico-phenomenological way, that is to say, the way that I've learned from Heidegger mostly, and other scholars / thinkers that belong to the phenomenological and hermeneutical tradition. What does that entail? Well, first of all, it entails that the text should not be approached as an object to be studied, where the word studied implies measured and calculated, but the text is something that is at work. That is to say, it provokes us to rethink our position in relation to ourselves and in relation to things. So the first thing that the hermeneutical phenomenological approach demands is that the reader, in his dealing with the text, invests himself, engages with the text as a source of challenge. The text should challenge you. The text should make you think twice about what you have been thinking so far, about the assumptions on which you've been riding so far. Now, the other aspect of the hermeneutical phenomenological approach has to do with the word phenomenological. What does phenomenological mean? It means that a text or anything produced by the human being, so it can be also an artifact, a work of art, but in fact also something that we use, like a house, for example, or a car, or you name it. Well, anything that the human being produces, everything that the human being brings forth, tells us something of the way in which that given human being and that given group of human beings has understood what being human means and what things are. So behind every text, like behind every artifact, there is a certain understanding of things and of human life. Now, this understanding of things in human life doesn't rest on speculations. It doesn't rest on the chaining of thoughts. It doesn't rest on syllogisms and theorems. It rests on some kind of immediate grasping of the meaning of things, of the ultimate sense of things. This immediate grasping is something very concrete. It's something that happens, something that emerges. And it emerges not because we decide for it to emerge, but because it emerges. To give you a practical example. Let's think of a question that sometimes we are asked, but to which there is no plausible answer. Let's think of a love relationship, right? Imagine that one partner were to ask the other, why do you love me? What is the answer to this question?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I missed out, I think, one word or two.
The question is, if a partner asks the other, why do you love me? What is the answer to this question?
The answer would be you're pretty.
Hmm?
The answer would be the pretty.
Because you're pretty, you will tell the girl. Yeah, the girl will get really offended because there are many pretty girls out there. So it means that you would put her on the same level with other pretty girls out there.
Think.
And by the way, I think that if she loves you, she doesn't love you because you are pretty, because a man is not pretty.
Yeah, of course, men have a lot of money, that's why.
Yeah, that could be an answer, but in that case, it's not love. I mean, it's something else. It's interest. Your interest in the capabilities of this person from the monetary point of view. So what is the answer to why do you love me?
Special.
Right?
I think in this context, it depends a lot on the consequences you want to face as well.
Meaning?
Like if your partner is asking this, is seeking for confirmations, then it's better to reassure the partners in a way that, hey, I love you because you have certain accumulative of something accumulative of good things in you. And if your partner is really asking you philosophically, then I think we can ask, we can we can answer more in depth, like maybe because I feel that I feel a spiritual connection with you, so that's something we can share that so that we can went through our physical life, rest of our physical life together.
Okay, so basically you are saying, I love you because I love you. I don't know precisely why I love you. I feel something.
Yeah.
I feel something, right? But the question, why do you love me, has only one answer. I love you because I love you. Because something has happened. Something on which I cannot put my finger, but it's concrete. Okay? So, when a human being grasps reality in a certain way, grasps things in a certain way, and understands things to have a certain meaning, something as concrete, but as difficult to pin down as in the experience of love has happened. To give you a historical example, when the Chinese started saying that everything is Tao, they didn't reach this conclusion because they sit down and had a conversation, and at the end of the conversation they said, well, you know, all things calculated and taken into account, everything is Tao. No, clearly not. The Chinese felt at a certain point that the best word to define, to name their understanding of things was Tao. Now, where does this understanding of things come from? That's mysterious. But saying that it is mysterious, it doesn't mean to say that it's not concrete. It's very concrete. Pretty much like, where does the being in love with someone come from? It's mysterious, but it's concrete, it's true. In fact, it's the truest thing that one feels in life, if one has the fortune to ever be in love. So, going back to the phenomenological approach, what does the phenomenological approach do? It forces us to ask, behind certain words that are thematic words, what kind of concrete, fundamental understanding of things lurks? Behind the word love, for example, there lurks a fundamental, concrete understanding of things, an experience. Behind the word Tao, for example, what kind of fundamental experience lays? That's the phenomenological approach. Phenomenological, in fact, comes from the Greek word phenomenon. What is a phenomenon? Phenomenon is something that appears. Now, let's talk of a phenomenon. A phenomenon, as something that appears, is, for example, the fact that one is red on the face. Now, one can be red on his face for different reasons. Because one is ashamed, because one is angry, because one has a fever, because one feels hot, because one, I don't know, and you name it, right? There are several things that can lurk behind that redness on the face. So we have the phenomenon, red face. We have to go look for what lurks under that phenomenon. And that's what the phenomenological approach makes us do. So the Greeks use the word logos. The word logos can mean and has meant different things over the course of its history. However, the phenomenon that lurks beneath it is one. What is it? In other words, what the phenomenological approach makes or forces us to do is to go look for what in the thought and hence in the words of any thinker, and a thinker can be a poet, an artist, you name it, what behind these words lurks as the concrete experience. Put in other words, the phenomenological approach forces us to go and see what the thinker, the artist, the writer, the painter that we are approaching has seen. Every great thinker writes and speaks because he or she has seen something. The effort is to recover that primeval experience that the words used by this thinker point to. Why do we need to recover this experience? Well, because through centuries, in fact, millennia of usage, these words have lost their poignancy. In other words, they've lost their original strength. They've been overused. And by being overused, they've lost force. To give you an example of such a loss of force, let's take again the word, or let's take the word idea, which is a word that you're going to find in the document I sent you. The word idea for us means vaguely something that we cook up with our mind. Correct? Mm. However, this word, if put in these terms, would be unrecognizable to the one who first used it to speak about philosophy. That one was Plato. Plato is the first one who used that word in a philosophical discourse. What did Plato understand by that word? Did he understand something that we cook up with our mind? No. He understood something completely different. This is an example of how a word, through usage, can lose its first vigor, its first strength. So the effort that the phenomenological approach forces us to do is, on the one hand, to go back to the concreteness of what lurks behind words. But in order for us to do that, we must follow what the word says. This thing that I'm saying now, following what the word says, is extremely important, because it is through this that we are assured of the fact that we don't move arbitrarily. In other words, it is the word itself that takes us back to where it comes from. Okay? So this is the hermeneutico-phenomenological approach in a few words. The hermeneutical part has to do with the fact that each reader is called to engage in a fight with the text. And this fight doesn't leave the reader the way he was at the beginning of this engagement. If you really read anything of value, of course, not a comic book or the newspapers. By the way, the newspapers is the stuff that you shouldn't be reading, okay? Except for a few things like foreign policy and stuff like that. For the rest, newspapers and all these news that proliferate in the web should be carefully avoided. Oscar Wilde used to say that when he was asked, what's the difference between journalism and literature? Oscar Wilde was a very intelligent man whose intelligence was expressed through through wits. He said, well, it's easy. Journalism is, or literature is everything that should be read and is not read. Journalism is everything instead that should not be read and is constantly read. So, reading means to engage. Engaging means to get changed.
Prof, can I say something?
Yeah.
I understand your point of view about newspaper articles, but to be honest, a lot of my philosophies have been derived from comics and stuff like that. So what do you have to say about it?
Well, it depends on the comics. There are comics that make you think, of course. I can quote you a few, right? Of course, they make you think at a very shallow level. At most, they give you some ideas that then you toss around your mind. That's not really yet thinking. Thinking is altogether a completely different business. And engaging with a seriously philosophical or poetical text is a fatiguing enterprise, very fatiguing. To give you an example, the text that we're reading this semester has been in my mind for the past, in a serious way, for the past 5 years. And only now have I brought myself to actually write on it, to write a commentary on it. And even after writing the first sketch of this commentary, I know that this sketch is just the first sketch. It will need much more working, but not to make it more linguistically and stylistically polished, but to rethink again what I think I have understood Plotinus says. Okay?
Okay, understood.
So in other words, yeah, there are comics that make you think a bit, but the level of thinking there, and I say this out of experience, is very, very shallow. Very, very shallow. It's not the kind of thinking that brings you to the question, well, why then not to just put a bullet in my head in a serious way? An easy test to know whether you are really thinking is when you start thinking of suicide as something not unreasonable. Now, I'm not saying that you should commit suicide. On the contrary, if one really thinks, one realizes that suicide is never a good option, right? I'm saying though that real thinking, when it's real, is something that might bring you to despair. If you read Hegel, you know who Hegel was, right? Let me write it down for you. And then you go look it up. Hegel, who has been probably the culmination of Western philosophy in many ways. Hegel wrote, among other things, a fundamental work that is called Phenomenology of Spirit. Well, Hegel says that thinking is doubting, but radical doubting, a doubting that reaches despair. In German, he plays with the word doubt. In German, to say doubt, in German you say Zweifel. Despair in German is Verzweifel. So when you really think, you must be ready to face a sort of despair. Okay? All right, so let's go back to what I was saying before. Hermeneutical. It means that you must engage yourself with the text. You must be ready to open up a fight which might last a long time, and which, if it is conducted with earnesty, will surely change you. After all, the word hermeneutics comes from the name of the Greek god Hermes. Hermes was the messenger of the gods, the one that brings you a news that, of course, forces you to take a certain path. A book is something like that. A work of art is something like that. When you really encounter a work of thought, a work of art, you receive a message that spurs you to engage with it and to take position in relation to it. So the act of interpreting a text is not in any way even remotely similar to the act of learning notions. The act of engaging with the text is the act of picking up a fight with something. That's the hermeneutical part. The phenomenological part, let me repeat it, means that by following the word, each keyword, and listening to what it actually says, we go back to the concrete source of the phenomenon. Hence, we see what the thinker has seen. Okay? And why do we want to go there? Because it is only if we reach there that we can see, on the one hand, the concreteness of thought. On the other, we can start grasping what things meant for that kind of thought. All right, despair, yes, sorry, I misspelled it. All right, so now to the documents I sent you. The first document, the one that I uploaded on eDimension, is the treatise that we're gonna read. As you have seen, it's not very long. It's quite short. I'll reply to your question after this, Jonathan. It's quite short. It's like, I don't know, 15 pages maybe. You have on the one page of the document the Greek texts that, I mean, of course you cannot consult because you cannot read Greek, and you have the English translation on the other side. So what I ask you to do is to read the text carefully, possibly many times. Not possibly, you should read it many times. Then I sent you another text. The first one is the clarification of two keywords, idea and logos. Read also through this document, and then we're gonna expand on these words together. But in the meanwhile, start reading on the document. These two words that I clarify in this short document are keywords of Greek thought, and are keywords in the text of Plotinus at hand. There are at least two other keywords in the text of Plotinus. One is the word theoria, which your English translation renders with the word contemplation. The other word is the word physis, which your English translation renders with the word nature. We're going to clarify these two words as well later on. And some clarification about these two words you'll find in the third document that I sent you, which is the second here on Zoom, analysis of each thematic unit. In it, what I've done, I have divided the text in thematic units. If you take a look at the Plotinus text, you'll notice that it's already divided in chapters. I have grouped the chapters according to thematic units, and I've tried to analyze and comment on each thematic unit. So you'll find that there. Now, about this third document, this is the sketch of my commentary. So I'm sharing it with you. Please don't share it with anybody else. Keep in mind that it's a sketch, so it needs still much working, but it's a beginning in any case. So as you read the text of Plotinus, you can go check what I've written on this sketch. This sketch, by the way, will give us the scaffolding for our discussion in class. So it can serve you, you can use it as a way to keep track of fundamental questions that we're going to be looking at as we read the text of Plotinus. As we proceed, I will, I hope every week, provide you also with my own translation of the text, which I haven't started yet, except for a few passages, but I will start now. So as I complete each chapter in English, I will upload it on eDimension, okay? And then, of course, you can compare my translation with the translation of Armstrong, which is the one that you are following. These are the texts that so far I gave you, okay? Now, let's go to the question posed by Jonathan. Until we reach the level of despair, we have not reached a phenomenological understanding of the text. Yes. Meaning, you have reached the phenomenological understanding of the text once you feel that the text has disclosed for you something that in a way pushes you, something that makes you see things in a new light, something that has an urgency. If instead the text is just the occasion for tossing around a few opinions, oh, I think that this is nice, oh, I don't agree with that, or blah, 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 then you're not touching anything. You're just chit-chatting about something. And at the point, there are more interesting things to chit-chat about. Whereas the approach to, as I said, not only a philosophical text, but a great literary text or a work of art, so a painting, a statue, a piece of architecture, when it is an authentic approach, is something that moves you, that shakes you, something that provokes you. Once you reach that level, you can say that you are not done yet, but you are at the beginning of a path. Okay? Then other question, is meaning lost in translation? Yes, it can be lost. What does it mean to translate? To translate literally means to bring across. Transfero. Okay? In Greek, to translate in ancient Greek is herminevo. Again, the same word as hermeneutic. That is to say, to bring a message across. Now, when something is uttered in a language, bringing it across to another language can be a tricky business. True, there are many things that do not present difficulty being brought across different languages. But those things don't speak the essential. For example, things that are easy to bring across other languages. I'm hungry. I want this, I want that. This is this, this is that. But when it comes to fundamental words, we're never sure that the other language is saying what we think is saying. To give you an example, our modern usage of the word love is completely foreign to ancient languages. If you talk to an ancient Greek or an ancient Roman, or even just a person from the Middle Ages, if you talk to them about love, the way in which we talk about love, he wouldn't understand what you're saying. Why? Well, because the word love is now charged with meanings that it didn't have before. Or put in other words, the word love points to something else than it used to point to. Same thing. If you take as an example Chinese, many of you are either native speakers of Chinese or know Chinese as, in a way, their first language as well, together with English. Well, you must have experienced the fact that there are a bunch of words in Chinese that talk about essential stuff that cannot be exactly translated in English. Am I right? So, what does it mean then to translate? It doesn't mean just to find in the other language an equivalent word of our language, because that's almost impossible when it comes to essential words. It means instead to try and make so that in the receiving language, one expresses the same thing that is thought in the original language. Let me give you an example about this. Logos, the key word of all Greek thought, logos, not only of all Greek thought, but of Western thought. Today, the word logos is mostly translated and understood as reason. In this translation, it remains unclear what reason means, on the one hand. On the other, the original meaning of the word logos is reduced to an obscure word. What does logos mean originally? Well, it says a multiplicity of things. That word in Greek says a multiplicity of things. Can it be translated with reason? It can and it cannot. So, to go back to the question, is meaning lost in translation. Yes, it can be lost in translation. Yes, logos is the word out of which logic comes. And we'll see what that means. We'll touch on that as well, but not now. Then let's see the other questions. But translation may carry with it the internal biases, beliefs of the translators. Yeah, of course. That's why the business of translating is very, very tricky. A good translator is one that is aware of the risk of covering up the original word with its own presuppositions, and hence tries to avoid that risk. Okay? That's why the business of translating is a very difficult one. In the text that you're reading, to give you an example of a word that is constantly mistranslated, you find a mistranslation of this Greek word all the time. I'll write down in Greek and then I'll transliterate in Latin alphabet and then in English. In your text, this Greek word, physis, is constantly translated as nature. Now, let me do this little experiment so that you understand what I'm talking about. If I say nature, what is it that you think about? Tell me.
Tree.
What?
Trees.
Trees, yes. So you think about biological things out there, right? Animals, outdoors, yes. What else do you think about?
Traits, I guess. Characteristics.
Okay, nature.
Characteristics.
Now, also the characteristics of someone, right? We also say his nature is, meaning that his characteristic trait is blah, 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 blah. But mostly we think of nature in the sense of animals, trees, plants, and blah, 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 blah. So when Plotinus and the Greeks in general were talking about physis, that was what they were talking about? No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. The meaning that we give to this word physis is yes in the original as part of it, but it doesn't exhaust the original meaning. The original meaning says something much broader, something much deeper. In fact, in the text that you are reading, you find stuff like nature has a nature. What does that mean? Right?
There's a
In
lot.
order for us to understand what Plotinus says when he says physis, we must pay attention and not flatten it up against our simplistic understanding of that word. Okay? So, that's an example of how a translation can obscure the original meaning by covering it up with the biased preconceptions of the translator, who is not even aware that he is covering up the original meaning with his own preconceptions, even if this translator is a great scholar, like in the case of the translator of the text that you have. Okay? Now, from this, I want to move to another point, which is...
Professor, I think there are more points in the chat.
Say again?
I think there are more points in the chat about nature. Comments.
Yeah, but I don't wanna linger on that too much. It was just a quick example. I mean, we're gonna talk about nature extensively when the time comes.
Okay.
For now, I want just to quickly introduce you. Well, the agenda for today supposedly would have been 3 points, namely the introduction to hermeneutical and philological approach, then the introduction to Plotinus himself, and finally the introduction or a clarification to what is meant by the expression, the question of being. It seems that I won't be able to cover them up, all of them, so I probably the thing regarding the question of being will be pushed to next meeting. So let's go now to a quick introduction to Plotinus. So I bet that you never heard this name before, or maybe some of you might have, those who took my courses. Who was Plotinus, or who is Plotinus? If you go read a manual of the history of philosophy, you'll find that Plotinus is catalogized as the head or the beginner of a certain philosophical school that takes the name of Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism. That is to say, New Platonism. And then, of course, if there is a Neoplatonism, it means that Platonism at a certain point got exhausted, and then a new form of Platonism emerged. Now, this catalogation, Neoplatonism and Plotinus as the beginner of Neoplatonism, is an invention of modern scholars. The word itself, Neoplatonism, comes up at the end of the 19th century. Plotinus himself didn't see himself as a Neoplatonist, and even less as the beginner of Neoplatonism. Then scholars, in their mania of coming up with categories and catalogs, have invented also something called Middle Platonism. Because of course, if there is an old Platonism and a Neoplatonism, there must be something in the middle. And how do you call that? Middle Platonism. These are the nonsensical categorization of historians and scholars and nerds and bookworms of various scholars. But, you know, that's what you find in the manuals. So Plotinus in the manuals is catalogized as the beginner of the Neoplatonic school. Be warned though that this categorization doesn't mean pretty much anything. Who was Plotinus? Plotinus was a thinker, and a thinker who found in the thought of Plato what allowed him to finally express in an accomplished way a deep feeling of things that he had. We know it because his disciple Porphyry, who wrote a life of Plotinus, tells us. We know that when he was 27, after having looked through different philosophical schools in Alexandria in Egypt, where he was born and he grew up, he ran, under the suggestion of one of his friends, he ran into a philosopher whose name was Ammonius Saccas. This Ammonius Saccas was a Platonist himself. That is to say, was someone who read and taught the Platonic doctrine. After listening to Saccas, it seems that Plotinus said, finally, I found what I was looking for. So what is it that he found? The possibility, or rather, he found something that expressed in an accomplished way a deep intuition of things that he already had, but he couldn't express.
Professor,
Yes.
how do you spell Sakas?
Sakas, it depends, but ammonius either like this or like this with K instead. It depends. So, when did Plotinus live? Oh, before we go there, what I've been telling you so far, namely that Plotinus found in the words of Plato that he encountered through Ammonius Saccas something that allowed him to express himself, tells us something, namely that the thought of Plotinus unfolds, develops, manifests itself in the frame, in the horizon opened up by Plato's thought. Now, when did Plato live? Plato lived between the 5th and the 4th century BC. Okay, I'll write it down. Plato, 5th, 4th century BC. When did Plotinus live? Plotinus lived in the 3rd century AD. So almost 700 years, 600 and something years separate the two. That is to say, the distance between the two is as big as the distance between us and the Renaissance, between us and the discovery of America. I hope you know that the discovery of America was 1492. Well, in fact, bigger than that. 600 years means that we have to...
Professor?
Yes.
Are you sending any message?
Yeah, on the chat box.
We all don't receive it.
Oh, I think you're messaging to a specific person.
Oh, man.
You need to click to and then the change.
Send it to everyone.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting.
You know, it's okay. It's okay. Good thing that you told me. Now it should be there. Do you have it?
I think you need to send the messages again.
Yeah, I need to send it again.
Also the...
Copy and paste, then send again.
Okay. Copy and paste everything, right?
Yeah. When someone private messages you, it will automatically make you reply to that person.
I see. Wait a second, huh? Copy. Oh, man. And paste. Paste. It doesn't paste though. No, it doesn't allow me to copy. I mean to paste the thing. Oh, what can we do now? Well, you know, in any case, everything we said is recorded, is being recorded, so you'll find it recorded. So I was saying between Plato and Plotinus there are 600, 700 years of difference, and yet Plotinus is within the horizon of Plato's thought. In a way, we can say that Plotinus is the greatest, deepest interpreter in antiquity of Plato's words. Plotinus, in a way, brings forth certain tenets of Plato's thoughts that, as such, in Plato himself, remain, I don't want to say hidden, but they're not made completely explicit. Okay? Now, This is Plotinus. Plotinus was a Greek. He spoke Greek and wrote in Greek, but he was not born in Greece. In fact, as far as we know, Plotinus has never been to Greece. Plotinus was born in Egypt, grew up in Egypt up to when he was 28, 29. And then through various adventures, so to say, he reached Rome. Why do I say adventures? Well, because at a certain point, Plotinus wanted to discover the wisdom of the East. So he embarked in a military expedition together with the Emperor Gordian to go east. The expedition was a failure. Plotinus himself barely escaped being captured and enslaved. And long story short, by the time he was 30-something, he reached Rome. How come that a Greek is in Egypt? Well, back then, Greek culture was spread all over the Eastern Mediterranean. And when it came to culture, that is to say to philosophy, to art, to literature, Greek was the language of the Roman Empire. Anybody in the Roman Empire who considered himself a cultivated person had to know Greek, had to be able to speak and read Greek. The fact that Plotinus was a Greek of Egypt makes so also that Plotinus was exposed to a variety of different cultures. That's because when Plotinus was living, that is to say in the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire in its entirety was a melting pot of different cultures, of different religions, of different beliefs, of different ways of understanding things. And one of the centers, one of the most lively centers of this melting pot was Alexandria. Alexandria, the city on the coast of Egypt, a city that right now is in decadence, but back then was the 2nd city of the Roman Empire, the first being Rome. So Plotinus spent his first youth in Alexandria. And it is in this lively cultural environment that he started his thought path. What does it mean to say that the Roman Empire was a melting pot? A melting pot of what? Well, of different, as I said, civilizations, of different cultures, of different ways of understanding things. Most remarkably, in that period, something new was emerging. And this something new, for us, men who come 1,700 years after, takes the name of Christianity. This is the period in which Christianity starts in an ever more decisive way, affirming itself and spreading all throughout the empire. But the affirmation of Christianity brings with itself a complete change in the way in which human beings understand themselves. And in this change, what gets in a way put upside down is the way in which Greek thought at conceived things. Plotinus is an acute witness of this momentous revolution. And is not just a passive witness. Plotinus tries to reaffirm the Greek way of looking at things. And how does he do so? By reinstating the words of Plato. What I've been telling you so far about Plotinus should make you see what I told you before regarding what it means to read a text. I told you that to read a text means to engage with a text, and this engagement means that you invest yourself in it. And investing yourself means that you are ready to get changed by this engagement. In Plotinus, you see exactly that. He has engaged with Plato. He has embraced the way of understanding things that Plato presents. And he has showed himself to be ready to fight for this way of understanding things in the face of a mounting new way of understanding things, which was rapidly conquering the minds and the consciousness of people. So Plotinus is, in a way, a vivid example of what I was telling you before. So, to recap what I said so far about Plotinus, we have in him the greatest interpreter of Plato's thought in antiquity. And this means that through his words, through the words of Plotinus, the thought of Plato is made more explicit as for its tenets. And we have in Plotinus someone that, engaging with the thought of Plato, starts a fight against the new emerging culture, which will become the Christian culture. To give you an idea of how dramatic the life of Plotinus in this sense must have been, you need just to look at the timetable of his life. Plotinus was born in 209 AD. He died in 266, I think, AD. In 310 AD, that is to say 40 years after his death, Christianity was declared by Constantine the Great legal. And in a few years, Christianity became the only official religion of the empire, which meant the complete pushing away of any other religion, starting from paganism, and the outlawing of Platonism. A few centuries after the declaration of Christianity as legal and then as the religion of the empire, the philosophical school of Athens was closed down. and its philosophers were forced to leave by Justinian the Great. So Plotinus is a thinker that lives at the crossing of two eras and is fully aware of this crossing. Why do we then read this particular text? Because in this particular text, these two aspects of Plotinus's thought come to the fore. Namely, as I said before, the fact that he makes explicit certain fundamental tenets of Platonism, and on the other hand, the fact that he openly contrasts certain fundamental tenets of the new mentality, namely the Christian one.
So Plotinus single-handedly delayed the crossing of the era, the changing of the...
No, not at all. In fact, if we calculate his effort from the point of view of the effect, it was a complete failure. Because as I said, 40 years after his death, the thing went to catastrophe. And generally speaking, philosophy has no effects, at least immediately. But this consideration of the effects of philosophy brings me back to why we read Plotinus. I told you that Plotinus made explicit the tenets of Platonism. Well, then why do we read Platonism? Why are we interested in the tenets of Platonism? Because the tenets of Platonism are, in a way, the fundamental tenets of the way in which the Western man understands things. And the way in which the Western man understands things, or has come to understand things, is the way in which modern man understands things. As those of you who have taken my courses in the past have heard me repeating, the modern world is a European world. And the European world comes from the Greek world. So the interest in reading Plotinus is in the fact that Plotinus helps us clarify Platonism. And the interest in clarifying Platonism is that through that clarification, we can understand better certain fundamental traits of the way in which we modern men have come to think. Okay? Now, let me see the questions that you have. Yeah, so Plotinus actually lived under Roman regime. Yeah, Plotinus was a citizen of the Roman Empire. Probably didn't know Latin, he spoke only Greek, but back then it wasn't a problem. Were there any notable competing ideas in this era which you're... What do you mean by competing ideas? I mean, for example, there is something like a competing ideas. If by competing ideas you mean ideas that are incompatible or seem to be incompatible. In the text of Plotinus, the entire text of Plotinus that we're reading, in a way, is an attack, is a refutation of the understanding of the coming into being of things as the result of some kind of fabrication, of some kind of creation, of some kind of deliberate assembling. Where do we find the idea of the coming into being of things as a deliberate assembling? Well, in the Bible, in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Then thanks to Hellenism? What do you mean thanks to Hellenism? Hellenism is not a religion, so it's not practiced. Hellenism is Greek culture. What we call Greeks, they themselves call themselves Hellenes. So Hellenism means Greekanism. Like Americanism means being American. Italianism means being Italian. Hellenism means being Greek. Okay?
Sorry, Prof. But I thought Hellenism is also related to Christianity and Christian religion.
No. I mean, Hellenism is, as I said, the general name to refer to a certain period of Greek culture. And it's the period of Greek culture in which Greek culture meets other cultures and mingles with them. It's the period that goes from the death of Alexander the Great and stretches down to the advent of Christianity. Now, Christianity, in many ways, is a cultural phenomenon that arises from within Hellenism. That's why Christianity can be thought to be connected to Hellenism. Christianity, as we know it, is the result of the mingling of a fundamentally Jewish understanding of things with Greek philosophy. Okay?
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Then, was Plotinus' efforts a success or a failure? Seeing his work went on to significant influence. Well, yeah, as I said, if by success you mean that he had a direct influence on the unfolding of social, cultural, political events, then no, it was a complete failure. But one shouldn't judge the success of a thought path on those things. As I told you, nobody would think that Plato's thought has directly influenced society. Of course it hasn't. But the way in which modern man thinks is Platonic through and through. So in a way, one could say that the influence played by Plato is determining the way in which we live. So it has had the hugest possible impact, right? One of our tasks is to go see in which sense precisely this impact works. Where does this impact precisely rest, okay? All right, so I think that the time for us to stop has come. Next time that we meet, that is Thursday at 10 a.m., we will go through a clarification of what is meant by the expression question of being. And then, hopefully, we can start reading the text directly, okay? Now, for next time, what I would like you to do is to gather questions that you might have regarding what we said so far, put them in a clear form, and present them to class at the beginning of the lecture, okay? All right, good.
Would this be an individual task, or do we gather it on an online document?
Can you say it again?
Would this be an individual thing, or do we try to gather everyone's into one document?
Maybe, I mean, if you want, you can gather it into one document. Maybe that's gonna be easier, if you can, if it's not too troublesome. Or you can just present questions here at the beginning of class next week, next Thursday. Okay,
that sounds good.
Okay, all right, so I wish you a good evening and we'll see each other Thursday morning.
Okay, thank you.
Same to you,
Bye,
bro.
guys.
So, bro.
Best,
Thank you, bro.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay,
Don't
bye bye,
describe too
Prof.
much.
Bye bye.